Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Grand Page. I am your most humble and obedient servant, Page Ghost. I apologize for being absent last week. Things have been really crazy for me around here. However, this week I am prepared to finish my reviews of the JAWBREAKERS series. This is the fourth and final book of the mainline JAWBREAKERS books. And this is all in lead up to Richard C. Myers, or your boy Zach's, JAWBREAKERS contingency book that should be releasing, going out to print sometime this year. I'm very excited for the contingency. I remember when he pitched the original idea. He's always been, your boy, he's always been very critical of the interpretation of Batman being basically contingency man. And as I've grown and sort of looked more into that perspective, I definitely see that point. Because at the end of the day, Batman is really just a regular guy. And I think Contingency Man, or JAWBREAKERS Contingency, is going to be a kind of critique / breakdown of that idea. So I'm very much looking forward to it. If you remember from my Grand Bazaar video, if you watched that, my review of JAWBREAKERS Grand Bazaar, I'm pretty sure that is my favorite JAWBREAKERS book. I think that still stands. However, in general, JAWBREAKERS Forever, I definitely give a recommend here as well. I'd say it's a pretty good mix of humor and serious stakes, whereas Grand Bazaar, there was definitely humorous aspects to Grand Bazaar, and there are definitely stakes, but the stakes are certainly grander in JAWBREAKERS Forever, God King, that sort of thing. And so, in general, my recommendation for JAWBREAKERS Forever, I would not put it above Grand Bazaar. I really feel like JAWBREAKERS Grand Bazaar hit that pocket of serious stakes, but then also a good balance of humor. But I would say that JAWBREAKERS Forever is probably neck and neck with Lost Souls, where it gets a really good blend still of serious stakes and humor, but I think Grand Bazaar just does it just that little bit much better. To get into the story in more detail, I don't know how much I'll spoil this, but it's been out for a good while, and I don't think I can say anything that will deter you from reading it just because I reveal certain events. Because actually, when it comes to things like spoilers and stuff, I'm one of those people. How do I even put this? I'm not someone who you can't really spoil a movie for me. I don't think, because for me it's not the thing that happens, but rather how it happens. And so, the only way to spoil a story for me would probably be to just tell me the whole story and not just like a particular event from it. In which case, the only way to spoil a movie for me is for me to watch the movie, right? But anyways, I'm kind of getting sidetracked on tangents and whatnot. So this is a much simpler book compared to some of the previous ones. A lot of the previous ones have a lot of other stories in them. Grand Bazaar, I think I had like 2 JAWBREAKERS stories. Both were really good. And then Lost Souls had several books. God King had a couple as well. This one has 2 stories in it, but it's only one JAWBREAKERS book, and it's significantly longer than previous books. So that's JAWBREAKERS Forever. And then another story by Chuck Dixon called Salt and Sugar. It's fine, and it's a little humorous, but you get it for the JAWBREAKERS book, really. It's just a nice little addition. But the JAWBREAKERS Forever picks up right where God King left off at. However, with this added character from Grand Bazaar, which was interesting because it's so you could easily, despite the fact that Grand Bazaar is an origin story for the Jawbreakers, you could technically read Lost Souls, God King, then Grand Bazaar, the origin story, and then jump into Jawbreakers Forever. And despite the fact that a lot of Richard C. Myers, your boys, Zach's books do have confusing plot elements to them, I've got to hand it to him that that sequence of Lost Souls, God King, and then the origin story at Grand Bazaar, and then picking back up after God King with Jawbreakers Forever, that sequence of storytelling really, really works. I've really got to hand it to your boy on doing that, because most of the time when you involve prequels and stuff like that, it really does. For me personally, it really doesn't work in a lot of different ways. A good example of this is you have New Hope, Star Wars: A New Hope, and then so many decades later, we had Star Wars: Rogue One. And by no means is Rogue One a bad story. Not in the slightest, right? The characters are very interesting. It's very well executed. That Darth Vader scene is iconic for a reason, right? However, there's nothing there that justifies its existence, and it doesn't really fit in with the rest of the Star Wars lore. Like, we didn't need a story that filled in the details of how did we get these plans. Like, sometimes you don't need every question answered. Otherwise, how do I put this? If you have every question answered, then there's no need to discuss anything around stories. And then if there's no need to talk about stories, then they don't last forever. That's basically the closest gist to it. And so you have Rogue One, and it's a prequel story, and it just never really fit into the Star Wars universe, whether it be because it was made so many decades later, or it's explaining things that really didn't need explaining. There's a couple different reasons why it really doesn't work. But here I would argue this series of 4 comics, and the fact that the third book is a prequel, really, really works. And I gotta hand it to your boy Zach on that. He really did a good job of making these books work well back to back, despite the moving timeline, so to speak. So, really great seamless transition from Grand Bazaar to Jawbreakers Forever. And then the other heroes in this book, because it's not just about the main heroes are still Silkworm and Cuffs, very much. But the integration of other heroes in this universe is done a little bit better than they were done in God King. However, you're still feeling like there's some missing context. You feel like there's a book here that's supposed to be present that isn't, that sort of thing. So very much that is still, that issue, like in previous books, is still present. However, it's still much better executed here, because you do get a little bit more time with some of these heroes than you did in those previous books. And then to get to the big thing that I really, really like about this is the use of the different dimensions, or the different timelines, sort of thing. So this is getting into like super heavy spoiler territory. So if that deters you, now's your chance to get away from this. So you have this new villain. Really, it's God King. So God King survived, and he becomes the herald of the villain from Grand Bazaar. She's not really a villain. She's it's weird. You have to read the stories, but he becomes this kind of herald for the villain from Grand Bazaar. And instead of being named God King, now he's called Rat King. And he still very much hates Silkworm. Hates for what Silkworm did to him in God King and things of that nature. But he come to find out how the Jawbreakers sort of storytelling universe works, because there are multiple dimensions and multiples of the different characters and everything. Basically, how things work is there are different branches of events, but in between those branches, everything comes together for a singular event. Things that are like, I think, as terrible of a movie as it is, The Flash kind of introduced this idea of, I forget the exact term, but they are event constants, these things that happen in every universe, in every iteration, no matter what. So, like in the Flash example, in every universe of the DC, Batman loses his parents. Right, that's an event that's a constant event throughout dimensions. In the Jawbreakers, it cites a similar thing, it cites John Wilkes Booth shooting Abraham Lincoln. That happens in every universe. Other major history events are referenced to support that idea, and in every universe, there's some sort of battle that Silkworm and Rat King have to come together for, and so. Despite how much they might hate each other, ultimately they do have to work together. And so this is a way for your boy Zach to bring back the characters that he killed, because they're basically versions of these characters from alternate dimensions, alternate timelines, that sort of thing. Or not alternate timelines, but alternate branches of dimensions. And they sort of split off into two teams. Silkworm stays where he's at with his new Jawbreakers team to get ready for this coming conflict that Rat King's going to help him out with, and Rat King's going to take his own team and go off and get further help and whatnot. So, despite how complex that multi-dimension idea is, it is explained very well, I would say, in this book. I would say it's pretty unique as far as storytelling is concerned, because most of the time, either there isn't multiple dimensions, or there's so many different dimensions that there's basically a different version of the same character for everything. You're experiencing this with Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse and all that, where there's basically a million different Spider-Mans. Whereas here, there are certainly several other Silkworms, there are several other Devil Dogs, right? There are different versions of these characters, but there's not an infinite number. It's not endless. There can only be so many branches between these sort of singular events between the branches. So I found that pretty interesting. Another way to explain it, if you've seen the show Dark Matter with Joel Edgerton on Apple TV or Apple Plus or whatever you want to call it, that streaming platform, it's a similar concept to that, where there can only be so many different dimensions because you can only make so many decisions based on certain information, and the person who's making those decisions can only come up with so many different possibilities. So there's not like an infinite number of dimensions, but there's the potential for several of them based on those decision making. So again, bottom line, Jawbreakers Forever, I'd probably sit it at Lost Souls, and both of those come second to Grand Bazaar. I would say Grand Bazaar is still the better book, simply because I feel like the humor hits a little bit better with these Jawbreakers books than the seriousness. But I would say that Lost Souls and Jawbreakers Forever both have a good level of seriousness to humorous tones, and it fits really, really well with the ongoing story, especially with Grand Bazaar being this origin story, but technically you read it third. That sequence of storytelling works really, really well, and I am really looking forward to Jawbreakers Contingency. Based on what Contingency is technically about, so like the synopsis, right, of it being about this character who's comes up with all these contingency plans. I don't know how. I don't think your boy Zach is planning on continuing the storyline that started in Jawbreakers Forever going into Contingency, because Contingency seems like its own thing. I certainly haven't read it. It's not even out yet, so I can't confirm that. But just based on the synopsis, it seems like it's a bit of a different conflict, and maybe he's still figuring out exactly how he wants to continue the story that is sort of hinted at and foreshadowed at the end of Jawbreakers Forever. So I'm really looking forward to Contingency. Definitely seems like there's going to be a Jawbreakers 6, though, after Contingency. We'll have to wait and see. I gotta read Contingency to find out. And those are the main Jawbreakers books. I will most likely do the spin-off books. As far as I know, there's two. There's Knife Hand Blind Spot, which I have read several times, and that's good. And then one that I'm waiting on is the origin story for Cuffs. He actually got his own graphic novel, so that was pretty cool. And once I think I will do those other books. They do seem to be much more standalone than the Jawbreakers main line. So you don't necessarily need the, as far as I know. I haven't read Cuffs Origins, but I do know Knife and Blind Spot. It does seem like you can read those books on their own, and they can be like their own thing. But again, bottom line, I do recommend Jawbreakers Forever. It was a fun read. It is the one story. It's a bit longer than most of the other Jawbreakers stories. But it was definitely a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. But if you got to pick between like Grand Bazaar and like Jawbreakers Forever or something like that, I would probably say go with Grand Bazaar for the more comedic aspects with a little bit of stakes. Whereas if you like something a little more serious, especially if you're into that alternate dimensions and stuff like that, Jawbreakers Forever is definitely a good read. With all that being said, I am your most humble and obedient servant, Page Ghost.